There we go. All right. Well, welcome everybody to the Ocean County Historical Society's temporarily virtual speaker series. Back in the pre-pandemic days, if you can remember those days, we'd host these at our museum in Toms River. But for everyone's safety, we have been online for quite some time now. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Melissa Ziobro, and I am a trustee of the Historical Society. I happen to be hosting these talks for now, but a lot of people help out with the logistics. So let me thank our president, Dr. Jeffrey Schenker. I'd also like to thank some other trustees who work really hard behind the scenes to find our speakers and to make these events possible, especially Barbara Roysch and Richard and Mickey Kuntz. Now, I have just a few housekeeping announcements before we dive into today's program. As I noted before I hit record, again, today's program is being recorded and will be available for playback on our YouTube channel in case any of you are more comfortable keeping your camera off or anything. We do also ask that you keep yourself muted while the speaker is talking so we can cut down on the background noise. Today's speaker series, like so many of our events, is free, but we do rely on your donations to keep us going and to continue our mission, telling the stories of Ocean County. We'd like you to know that you can donate from the safety and convenience of your own home via our website, oceancountyhistory.org. You can also sign up to be a member there. Perks include our award-winning newsletter, early registration and discounts on some programs, and more, all outlined on our website. Please know that even though we're online for this event today, we are open, both the museum and research center. You can find the hours and all other necessary information on our website also. And I'd also like to remind you that we are on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. So please follow us on the platform of your choice or on all. Just a little about our upcoming events. On November 14th, we'll have a virtual Sunday lecture called Meet a World War I Doughboy. Then our December virtual lecture on December 5th is titled The Road to Gettysburg. And we're really happy that we are doing our holiday tea again this year. That's not virtual. You can actually get together with us. That will be on December 6th. And registration opens soon. So please keep an eye on our website, social media, and your email if you get our email mailings. So with that, we can move on to today's event. With us on this rainy Sunday, we have Russell Dutcher to discuss the Dutch Civil War in northern New Jersey and southern New York. He will speak for about 45 minutes, and it's usually after that we do our Q&A. However, I am told by Russ that if you have a question that can't wait till the end, by all means, you can type it in the chat and I'll read it, or you can use the hand function and I'll call attention to you so that you can ask your question as is appropriate during the talk. You don't necessarily have to wait to the end if you'd like to get that question out. So anyone have any questions for me before we get started? Okay, Russ, you ready to roll?
Yes.
Okay, take it away.
Hello, folks. Melissa, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. And today's topic, the Dutch Civil War in northern New Jersey and southern New York. Probably most folks who are not just in this venue today attending, but throughout their scholastic career, have not even realized that there was a Dutch Civil War that took place as part of the American Revolution in these areas. We've all been told, of course, that the Revolution was a war between the colonists fighting for independence, of course, fighting against loyalist factions who allied with the mother country. But as part of that, I have to go back and set the tone for the Dutch peoples. The Dutch were a very straightforward, strict type of person. They were very proud people. They had settled New Netherland. They had fought a series of naval wars with the English for control of the seas. And they had relinquished New Amsterdam, New York, to the English, and for a year, won it back, and then finally relinquished it in 1676. That being said, the Dutch were embedded in areas of New Jersey, especially central and northern New Jersey, to the extreme areas of Sussex and Bergen, and I call Old Bergen County because Passaic County today was part of Bergen, and also those regions of Orange County, New York, Westchester County, Rockland. They were embedded with the Dutch. For that reason, the Dutch Reformed Church was the end-all be-all for the Dutch. That was a mainstay, just as the church had been for many other ethnic groups, okay, at that time. The Anglican Church for the English, the Presbyterians, but for the Dutch Reformed Church and also the Lutheran Church, it was the center of their lives. But more importantly, what started to grow out of the Dutch Reformed Church in the 1720s during another great awakening of individualism and liberalism, especially within the church, there was a marked dissemination and a bridge between the church. There were two factions. There was a faction called the Conferenti, which allied themselves with the old ways of the Dutch, the old Dutch ministers. There was a new influx of thinking, enlightened thinking in the church. It was called the Codes. These were new ministers with new ideas. There had been also an influx in the Dutch community of intermarriage. Make this an important part, even before we discuss the Civil War, the fighting that took place during the Revolution. With that influx of the English, the French Huguenots, new religious awakenings, the Presbyterianism mixed with the old Dutch, there was, like I said, a new idea. This rift started to expand immensely from 1726 up to and right before the American Revolution. As a matter of fact, at certain points in the Dutch Reformed congregations throughout northern New Jersey and southern New York, there were violent clashes between both of these groups. Not just verbal, but at times there were physical clashes. And this, again, expanded upon the ferocity of the fighting that took place during the American Revolution. Bergen County in New Jersey and Sussex County were two of the most prevalent areas for the Dutch. The Dutch had been in these areas since the mid-1600s. Families, generations of families had been there. They had made their way over the years. They had built their farms. They had built their businesses, okay? And in that regard, when the war came, New Jersey, and everybody thinks that New York and New Jersey, everyone flocked to the colors right after Lexington and Concord. I will tell you, these parts of New York and New Jersey were slow to move toward independence. Yes, there were pockets in these areas of individuals who were flocking to the colors. We must remove ourselves from the mother country. We must fight for our independence. But for the most part, colony of New Jersey and New York was slow to warm to this idea to mobilize, especially in these areas. And I will let you know, and I will take this by county in these regions, Westchester County throughout the war was primarily a loyalist stronghold. And most people will say, well, we didn't see many, many loyalists joining loyalist military units. Yes and no in that, because there were a lot of neutrals. And when you are neutral in this situation and trading with the enemy and not supporting the patriot cause, you are now moved over and lumped into that loyalist. You may not be a hardcore loyalist, you'll be a soft loyalist. You'll do what you need to do for your family. And again, this caused a major, major rift. In this area, especially the area of Tarrytown and Phillipsburg Manor, which was the patent from Frederick Phillips I, was passed down to his grandson, Frederick Phillips III, when the war came. There were tenant farmers under the Phillips patent. Now, when I say tenant farmers, a lot of people think what we had in the South, like sharecroppers. That wasn't the case. Tenant farmers is what it said. They were tenants. They paid a fee, a rental fee, to the Phillips family. But these farms in these areas were 200, 300, 400 acre farms. These farms had grist mills, orchards. They were very, very well developed. When the war came, many of these Dutchmen in these areas, their families had been on these farms for generations prior, paying these rents, said, you know, this is our land. We want to be independent. Now, these were the extremists. Like I said, there were neutrals and there were out and out loyalists that said, we are not going to move from the mother country. We will do what we need to do to fight to stay with England. And again, in this area, this rift became very pronounced in Westchester County. There's something called the neutral ground. And any of you folks that are attending today, the neutral ground is a misnomer. Usually neutral ground means it's neutral. Both combatants are not in that area. For Westchester County, and I will get a little bit ahead of myself, Bergen County also had a neutral ground. For these neutral grounds, the devastation, folks, that took place, the ferocity of fighting that took place between family members, former friends and neighbors, it was bordered on out and out murder as the war moved on, progressed. There were raids back and forth. Homes were totally destroyed. People were butchered, were killed just because they didn't adhere to a certain edict in, like I said, going back to the Dutch Reformed Church of the two divisions, okay, the Whig and the Tory. If you were thought to be a Tory and you were at your farm, either in Westchester or say in Paramus or anywhere in Bergen, and you're there, someone comes down and say, you know, that person, I remember at the congregation at the Schrelberg Church or the old church of Bergen, you know, when the minister was speaking, he wasn't adhering to what the minister was saying. And again, going back, a lot of these ministers had great influence on their congregations. And the ministers were also not just espousing the religious edict, they were preaching politics. And as we well know, that religion and politics and religion, it mixes. This again caused another major problem. So getting back to a person being on their farm plowing, some other individuals might come by. They may look at this person, and because of this predisposition in their mind, just because of what went on in the church, because everybody at this point was armed, because they had to protect themselves and they had to protect their families, they might fire at this person and kill that person. And it might get worse. And because they did that, now at night, that family would be raided by marauders, calling themselves militia. But you know what, folks? In the end, unless they were really organized militia working with the Continental Forces under a regular command, these were just roving bands of individuals that were perpetrating murder in Westchester, Orange, and Bergen County. And this also came down into Somerset County. because I want to let you know that in Somerset County, there were a lot of French Huguenots. And the French coming from France to the Netherlands considered themselves Dutchmen. And many took Dutch names or changed their Huguenot names. And when they came over, they belonged not to a French church. They belonged to the Dutch Reformed Church. So they were Dutchmen as well. So you had a lot of fighting, not just in that northern corridor, you had it in Bergen, Sussex, part of Essex, going down across into Somerset, because we have to look at our state as it was then. We did not have near as many counties as we had now. And these areas were widespread. And I'll expand on this as well. Many individuals who owned land, both loyalist and patriot, in Westchester, Orange County, and New York, owned land in New Jersey, and vice versa. And the individuals that owned land in New Jersey owned parcels in New York. And this was very, very prevalent among the Dutch. The Dutch were very industrious. The Dutch tended to hang on to their funds, and they were very, very hard workers. And this, again, equated to the larger farms that they had, the businesses, the thriving businesses that they had. And during the war, what had happened was, because of this division, because of this hatred, everybody wanted what everyone else had. And because of the division that was perpetrated by the ministers from the 1720s up until the Revolution, and I will let you know, beyond the Revolution, still today, and I will let you know, still today, among families in these areas, because there are many Dutch families still in these areas, descendants, do you know there are still hard feelings among some of the families in the divisions? And I will let you know that, you know about Theodore Roosevelt and about Franklin Roosevelt. Dutch. There was a division there. And that division, from what we understand, goes back to even during the Revolution, during that whole Dutch Reformed problem within the Dutch Reformed Church that was going on. That split, that rift, that edict that was being perpetrated politically, not just religiously, but politically. And at this point during the Revolution, it was all about politics. Now let's move forward. What we do is we have the loyalists, the Dutch, allying with the British. We have the Dutch patriots with the committees of safety, trying to ally and get the best they can support from the Continental forces. And I will let you know, in these instances, many times it didn't happen. And I want to read you, and the reason I say this, I want to read you just a little excerpt from Henry Barton's treatment of Westchester County during the American Revolution. And I want to use a family member as an example. My family in Westchester County, the Dutchers, we were patriots. My ancestor, Captain William Dutcher, he was probably one of the most ardent patriots in the county. There was a price put out on him. His family was threatened. He had to move his family from Tarrytown in Westchester all the way up to the tip of Westchester County because they were threatened. Part of his home was burned. And just as what was done to him and his family, the retribution that he took upon those individuals was probably twofold. And I read just this small excerpt from Mr. Barton. He says, though there are no known doings of Gilbert Drake, and I will let you know, Gilbert Drake was the commissioner of the Committee of Safety for Westchester, Patriot, and Captain William Dutcher, in their known pillage among the conservative and peaceful farmers of Westchester County. That tells me, again, and just solidifies the fact, and I don't sugarcoat anything, that my ancestor, as we say, gave as good as he got. What was done to him and his people, he gave back. And the reason I say that, it shows you this ferocity, this tenacity, this ferociousness. And this was going on in Bergen County and Sussex County, New Jersey, especially in Bergen County. Irregulars, Dutchmen were coming across, loyalists from Staten Island, from across the river. They were attacking families, homes at night, burning the crops, taking everything and pillaging in their way. As the British came in, they saw this civil war was going on. So now this made their problem threefold. They're not just fighting the Patriots, okay? They're not just trying to quell a loyalist and patriot civil war. Now there's an internal civil war here among the Dutch population. So this made their job even more difficult. And on the reverse, for the Patriot forces, when they were trying to get support from the militia, yes, the New Jersey militia and the New York militia had well-organized units for a certain amount of time in a certain geographic area. But again, as the war progressed and there was less and less food, shelter, and fuel for heat, this ferocity grew and grew and grew. And for 10 years after the war in Westchester County, it took them about a decade to recover from this. Bergen County, just as well. It took them quite a few years just to recover from this devastating internal feud that was going on among the Dutch. I will tell you one thing about the Dutch people, being Dutch myself, they're not long on forgetting, and they do hold a grudge. And when they are quelled, when they are moved, when something happens and they are moved, they will move and they will act. And unfortunately, this is the result. So I just want to stop here if anybody has any questions.
If you do have a question, you have the power to unmute yourself. So you're welcome to do that and shout out. Or if you'd like to type it in the chat, I'm happy to read it for you.
There we go.
Okay, I think they're all still pondering, so let's forge ahead.
Okay, now I also I want to let you know that this presentation and my interest in this Dutch Civil War grew out of my thesis paper, my final paper, which is a analysis of the New York and New Jersey militia during the American Revolution. And it's a comparison of their makeup and their effectiveness. And I sort of delved into more of the cultural and ethnic, because of course, when we're discussing the American Revolution, we're talking about major battles and major commanders, but we forget about these incidents, especially what we're talking about today, because this is not taught in the schools. And if someone is lucky enough to have a teacher or professor glance over this, it's not expanded upon. And I'll be honest with you, in speaking to folks, most people do not even know that this was taking place in New York and New Jersey, this devastating internal Dutch Civil War. And I just want to let you know that there are a few treaties and a few books that have been written about this. And I want to present these to you now. Adrian Leiby produced an excellent book, The Revolutionary War in the Hackensack Valley. If you do get a chance to read it, it's through you can get it probably through Rutgers University and probably some of the reference libraries. An excellent discussion of the Dutch in this area, an excellent discussion of the Dutch Reformed Church and its influence in this area. Also, Henry Barton, as I told you, and I referred to you with my ancestor, Captain William. his treatise of Westchester County. It's Henry Barton Dawson. Very well written, yet I will say that there was a little bias in there towards the loyalists, but again, an excellent treatise, an excellent discussion. The unfortunate part about this information is that these were not books these were more of reference books that you'll find in reference sections in libraries and really not open more to the public. That's the problem. They tend to get moved to the back shelf, and we tend to forget about these. And unfortunately, in ongoing discussions of the revolution in New York and New Jersey, events such as the internal Dutch Civil War are not discussed, and they're not expanded upon. And this is a shame, because this is part of our history. This is what we need to discuss. And this is not a sugar-coated version, folks. When I first started undertaking the research regarding this, it enlightened me. It enlightened me regarding this aspect of the war, that the Dutch were fighting amongst themselves in such a way that paled in comparison to much of the war. And that's why, like I said, these hard feelings lasted for generations and still do to this day. Like I said, how would you feel if you're in your fields as a farmer, you're plowing, now you're armed because you don't know if you're going to be shot at. But at night, you and your family cannot sleep because now you have to worry that your two neighbors just the nights before were raided their farms. Maybe the husband was killed, the house was burned, family has nowhere to go, the livestock was run off. And this is what these people lived in every day toward the end of the war. Every day, folks. This is just a horrible, horrible situation. And again, I don't sugarcoat anything. This happened. People perpetuated this on former friends, former neighbors, family members who had moved to the Patriot or to the Loyalist side. And it's a shame. It's really a tragedy, but it's something, folks, that needs to be discussed. And I just want to read to you also something interesting that I found through the New Jersey archives. It was a British officer in Bergen County as he was going through. And it's his account on the, quote, guerrilla war. Remember I told you there were organized militias in these counties, both loyalist and patriot. The worst type of groups were the guerrilla forces. They had commanders loosely, but they really adhered to no one but themselves. And like I said, they were more of roving bands of marauders that were going through and just taking whatever they could get. And some folks have said to me about Cowboys and Skinners. Skinners, yes, with Cortlandt Skinner, who was a loyalist officer. And they said, well, the Cowboys were more of the Patriot. I said, no. The names given to them, the Cowboys and Skinners, they were mainly just marauders. They were more of loyalists. And the reasons these names were given to them, of course, the Skinners allied with Cortlandt Skinner, who was a Lieutenant General Skinner in the Loyalist New Jersey militia. The Cowboys were more of, they would attack, they would take your livestock, drive it off, move it over in boats, move it over to Staten Island, and just wantonly burn, pillage, and kill, just for the sake of doing it, for themselves. For themselves. And ladies and gentlemen, acting in the guise of a militia, that's horrible. That's why these groups were frowned upon even by the regular militia, the regular British forces, and the Continental Army. And even the British and Continental Army did at points try to stop this marauding, but to no avail. Because what are they doing? They're trying to maneuver and fight amongst themselves. They're trying to rely on the real militia, the organized militia, to supplement them. But then when they're not in this area, what do we have? These roving bands. And again, these roving bands, unfortunately, were the Jersey Dutch, those individuals who just wanted for themselves, wanted to take retribution because of this whole political division that stemmed from the religious division in the Reformed Church. But again, this British officer does state that their task was further complicated by having to fight both Washington's army. He says the irregular militia units in a civil war between rebels and loyalists, but to suppress a rebellion among the Dutch and ideologies, he said, that they could not comprehend. So again, from a British officer, what he's saying is, in his mind, he cannot understand what is going on here. Like I said, the complete disregard for life, the ferocity of what's taking place. And again, this equated to Orange County, New York, Westchester, Sussex County, New Jersey, Bergen County, parts of Somerset. And I'll be honest with you, we could go on and discuss this because this happened on the New York frontier and even down in South Jersey. The reason I picked these pockets here, this was the most prevalent areas, but this was happening all over, especially where there was a Dutch Reformed Church, or there were Dutch and Huguenots, and there were loyalists and patriots, Whigs and Tories, as we say. And it was just heart-wrenching, heart-wrenching. But it's something we need to know about, folks, that this took place and that this just fueled the war. It fueled the ferocity of the war. And then trying to get regular troops from both sides to quell this, it wasn't happening. These bands were allowed, like I said, to just roam, pillage, and do what they wanted. And the unfortunate thing too is that it was among the Dutch people, a people that we would think always tended to think out a problem and to act slower. But in the end, it reached a fever pitch, unfortunately. Anything, folks? Okay. Also, what I would like to do is discuss some of the ministers in the Dutch Reformed Church. Theodore Frelinghuysen. Yes. Question?
I had a question about the book, the two books you mentioned, reference books.
Yeah.
Who was the author of the Revolutionary War in the Hackensack Valley?
That was Adrian Leiby, Leiby.
Leiby. Okay.
Yeah, it was published by Rutgers University Press, I believe in the 1960s. The other one was Westchester County, New York. It was by Henry Barton Dawson.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and I just want to let you know that Henry Barton Dawson, like I said, his treatment was well written, but when you do read through the book, you must take into account some of his paragraphs. There's a bit of bias.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. But like I said, Theodore Frelinghuysen was a Dutch Reformed Church minister. He was of the Whig political party. So he was part of the Great Awakening, with the Dutch Reformed ministers moving toward independence. And that's what he preached to his congregation.
Russ, I have a question.
Sure.
How did, there were a lot of German immigrants at that time. How did they get on with the Dutch?
A lot of the German immigrants, of course, were Lutherans. And I will tell you that the Lutheran Church was allied with the Dutch Reformed. Now, as far as the Lutherans, believe it or not, many Lutherans became loyalists. Yes, because understanding the church, Martin Luther, the Lutherans, the Dutch Reformed Church really grew out of that. So it was an extension of it. So remember what I said about the Confrateri? They were more of the traditional Dutch. We adhere to traditional values. We do what we're told to do. What does that equate to politically? We're now subjects of the king, King George. We have what we have. I have a nice farm with a grist mill, and I have my cattle and my livestock, and I have a nice trade. I don't think I want to give that up, signing an oath of allegiance to the new provincial Congress, when if I do, I may lose this. So maybe I should just stay the course here. And then if something does happen, like I said, attacks upon people's land, this is what moved the neutral loyalists, I say the soft loyalists, over to a loyalist that will now take up arms.
How did the Palatine movement react in here?
The Palatine in New York, and that's mainly in New York, what they did, they were more allied, believe it or not, with the Patriot cause in those areas. Your Germans in New Jersey and on the fringe, as I called it. Now, not every Lutheran, not every Palatine was a Patriot or a Whig. Not every Lutheran was a Tory. We had mixtures here. And again, what was really interesting through this entire discussion that I had put together, and also my research, was the influence of the church, of the ministers, of their edict that they put forth to their congregations. And like I said, in Mr. Leiby's book, it's just so interesting where there's references to the fact that it wasn't just verbal attacks. It was physical attacks upon each other. And this had been growing since the 1760s, 10 years, more than 10 years prior to the American Revolution. And then as we started to get closer and closer, the division was much wider. There was much more of a split. And I just want to read you here, in 1775, May 12th, Bergen County, at the beginning of the war and just prior to, remember I told you New Jersey was kind of slow in moving forward to the cause of independence? Bergen County was one of the last counties to actually sign a association oath to their people adhering to the Patriot cause. And the reason being is, I'll go back to my previous sentences. I have a nice farm. My family's been here. I have stature. Do I really want to upset and lose what I have for something that might be quelled 3, 4, 5 months down the road politically? Or do I want to move forward, take up arms, and lose everything? And that's how the Dutch were thinking in this respect. And at that point, in Bergen County and Westchester County, most Dutch were either neutral, were either soft loyalists, neutral, or loyalists that said, okay, if this comes, I will take up arms. But at that point, most were neutrals. Most were soft loyalists, trying to maintain what they had. And it's interesting that also 3 counties in New York, Suffolk, Queens, and Kings. Believe it or not, Suffolk County, all 3 of these counties had heavy Dutch populations. Believe it or not, Suffolk County would give more men to the Patriot cause and form more militia units. Kings and Queens County basically buckled under and again said, we don't want to lose what we have. We will stay the course, stay with King George, and not upset the cart at this point. So they really did not give that much support from New York, from militia forces in any way, shape, or form. As a matter of fact, once the Continental Army did start to move in before the Battle of Long Island, many of these individuals moved out to other areas where the British were and where other loyalists were. And then, of course, as we know, after the Battle of Brooklyn, when Washington was pushed out of Long Island across New Jersey, I will tell you, there were many, many individuals in New Jersey and New York that had taken the oath to the Patriot cause, renounced it, and now took a new oath to King George. Because again, I moved forward. I do believe that we should govern ourselves, but now it looks like the British are just going to come through. This revolution isn't even going to really be a revolution. The war is going to be lost. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to go back to what I was doing. I'm going to sit on the fence. If I have to support them, I will support them. And that's it. And again, that's what went on. But again, you had extremists on both sides. Extremists on both sides. And that's where these roving bands, this ferocity of the attacks in Westchester County in the neutral ground, which wasn't a neutral ground. Because I will share with you, when they came to my ancestors' farm, part of our farm was burned, livestock was driven off, and my grandfather had been away on militia duty. He raised his own company with his own money. And I will tell you, almost every member of his company was Dutch. Family members, close friends, and people he knew, okay? And neighbors. Almost everyone was Dutch. When he was away, Tories, and there's a complete written account of this, Tories came to his house and threatened to kill his wife, burn the house, and the children in the house. He had been home. He was there. They saw him. They chased him. They didn't catch him because he knew the area. This is where he lived. He just barely got away. And in the official military records, and most people don't know that these records exist in the National Archives and the New Jersey Archives. And I just want to let all of you know, if you ever get a chance, please go on the New Jersey Library site, the New Jersey Archives. You would not believe what records exist from these periods. But getting back to Captain William, we saw in his official records written from the rolls, it says he was absent with his lieutenant and his drummer to move their families. This was at the exact same time when they came into Tarrytown, burned not just his farm, but other Patriot farms in the area and devastated them. He had to move his family all the way to the tip of Westchester County to an area that was more, accepted the Patriot cause, the Whigs up in the tip of Westchester County, to move them out of harm. And again, coming back, like I said, what he did in that area, even though Mr. Barton says there's no written accounts of it, I can just imagine what was done to his family and his farm. I can just imagine the retribution that was taken against Tories in that area. Was it right? No. Is it part of history? Yes. Is it part of my family history? Yes. Do I sugarcoat things? No. This is history. We need to know what went on in these areas among these folks. Because many times we're given sugar-coated history. We're spoon-fed it. We need to know the real history of what went on, what these folks went through. And if we do, we'll get a better understanding of how this war was fought. Sorry if I went on and on for that. Anything else? Any other questions, or, feel free.
Was that kind of the end of your prepared remarks?
End of my prepared remarks. Now I'm looking for, input from them. Now that you've heard me talk about the ferocity and what went on among the Dutch, let's get some input now.
Awesome. Okay, so again, you're welcome to unmute yourselves, or if you prefer not to speak, you can go ahead and type your question in the chat and I'd be happy to read it for you. While everyone kind of looks for their unmute button or where to type in the chat, I'll throw a question out there. Russ, we are living in a very politically divided time right now, right? Yes. And I think people often think that, things can't possibly have ever been this bad. And, what would you say to people who have concerns about our current divisive political rhetoric based on your analysis of past divisions in our society?
Yes, Melissa, you're absolutely right. What's going now is very divisive politically, and also some of the physical aspects that are taking place, the violence. And I hate to use the term that history repeats itself, but it's true. You would not realize that this took place during the war. We're all given a sense of the American Revolution as, yes, the fight for independence, like loyalists against patriots, Continental Army against the British Army, the major battles, the major commanders. But we never delve in to the personal aspects. And to be quite honest with you, what went on among the Dutch is very personal, is very, very personal. This is among a specific ethnic group. It's very personal. And you know what? This went on from 1776 to 1783 in these areas. And even beyond, because remember I told you there were hard feelings even afterwards. A lot of these individuals, loyalists, had to leave and go to Canada because they could not live in these areas for fear of retribution. So what we see going on here, I will say on this small scale, Melissa, at times pales in comparison to what went on among the Dutch. When you'd be in your field with your children and you're plowing, and a couple of men would come by and they'd fire, and the children's father is now dead in the field. Yeah. And this happened. And then your homes are burned at night and your family has nowhere to go. People, I hate to say it, but a lot of folks think that history in the United States just kind of popped up out of nowhere. No, this was generational. There was a lot of good and bad that happened. And we can't look away from that. We can't look away from that. We have to address that. And like I said, among the Dutch, what's happening on certain aspects today, politically, paled in what happened among the Dutch, the ferocity. I hope I answered the question there.
Okay, so do we have any other questions from the audience?
Yes. When I was an undergraduate at Rutgers, I was really surprised at the influence of the Dutch in the New Brunswick area. And on the campus there was, and I think still stands, a Dutch Reformed seminary
Yes.
And there's a statue of Willie the Silent down at the end of the quad there, right near the seminary. And lots of the buildings on campus, for example, there's Frelinghuysen dorm along the canal, which relates to the Frelinghuysen that you were mentioning earlier.
Yes.
How much of what you described was going on in, I guess that would have been what, Mercer County, right?
Middlesex.
Or Middlesex.
Middlesex County.
Yeah.
Middlesex County did also have a large Dutch community as well. Looking at the counties today, New Brunswick, which we know is in Middlesex County.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at some of the old maps, New Brunswick, when it said New Brunswick City, was actually in Somerset County.
Okay.
On the division lines.
Right.
North Brunswick, Somerset County. And I will tell you, the reason I know this is because I'm also a genealogist, and that's where my families were from. Now, this gentleman up here to my left, that's my 4 times great grandfather, John Taylor. John Taylor was an instructor at Queens College, Rutgers. Just prior to the war, he was a graduate of Princeton, and during the war. And we were lucky enough to have papers, they're called the Bogard papers, special collections at Rutgers, and some of his correspondence during the war. He was just as worried. Now, he was of English extraction, but he taught at a Dutch Reformed church, and many of his friends were Dutch Reformed. He was just as worried about his students at Queens College as he was about fighting the British. He served as a captain, a major, and lieutenant colonel of the Middlesex Militia, 2nd Regiment. He was at Trenton. He was with Cadwallader. They did not cross that night because they couldn't get across. But at the Second Battle of Trenton, he was there as well. But the reason I bring that up, and you saying about Rutgers, and Rutgers, tie into the Dutch church, and yes, the seminary still being there. Rutgers is very much allied with the Dutch Reformed Church. And these individuals that were in these areas, there was still a large Dutch influence, because like I said, New Brunswick and North Brunswick at that time, those areas were in Somerset County. The French Huguenots, remember I told you, had come over from France to the Netherlands, considered themselves Dutch. They took up the Dutch Reformed religion. Now they come to Staten Island, to New York, heavily integrated into Somerset County and Middlesex, and embedded there. So again, you actually had small pockets of infighting there as well, because I believe at one point there were 3 or 4 Dutch Reformed churches in Somerset County that serviced not just Dutch, but French Huguenot populations.
Thank you.
I had a question.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I'm actually from a Dutch background, but my family went to Canada. They were Dutch Mennonites. So it's a whole different story, and it doesn't apply to this particular discussion today.
May I ask the last name?
Gunther. Gunther is my
okay.
maiden name. G-U-E-N. E is, I understood, is Dutch, and without the E is German.
Yes.
But in any case, they were my dad's side of the family were all from Western Canada, Manitoba, and developed the farm, the lands out there. But my question to this discussion was with respect to the Roosevelts. You said that there was a division amongst the Roosevelt family, the Dutch, families up there in New York State. Whose side was which?
There was you had the Oyster Bay, which was Theodore Roosevelt's people, more and of course allied politically with the Republican side, and then you had the, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, his family were the Democratic side. But during the war, and Isaac Roosevelt, which comes from Theodore's line, served on the New York Provincial Committee of Safety, and he was also responsible for supplying the troops in those areas. So there were Roosevelts you would see, and I will tell you, there were Dutchers as well. We had two individuals in the family. One was a Derrick Dutcher who remained neutral as a loyalist, bet his farm against the outcome of the war. And when he lost, he was a man of honor, gave up his farm and moved to Canada. There was another Dutcher, David Dutcher, who at the beginning of the war took a commission as a first lieutenant in the Westchester militia. When Washington was pushed from New York across New Jersey, he actually resigned his commission and became a soft loyalist. So it would be more of the Theodore Roosevelt line, to answer your question, that would have been allied with the Patriot cause. And then you had the Delano line, which basically we really can't find much information of any real service during the war. So remember what I said about soft loyalists? If you really remained neutral, you were really considered as a soft loyalist because you're really not doing anything to help the Patriot cause. Okay, you may not be really doing anything militarily to help the loyalist cause, but you're not doing anything to hurt it. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions?
Yeah, I think I saw Rosemary Dudek was up there. Or did she have a question?
Rosemary, did you have a question? No? Okay, guess not. And there's nothing in the chat. So going once, going twice. All right, Barb, are you okay with ending the program then? Or do you have a last question yourself?
Well, if you know, oh, sorry.
No, I just was going to say, I think I have enough in my notes here to make sense.
Barb also, she wears many hats at the Historical Society. She also does our wonderful newsletter. So she's taking copious notes so she can write this up.
and I just want to share with you also those two books, like I said, but there are two others that I'd like you all to, if you can, and I think you can look at them, search them online. There's a book by Todd Braistad, Braistead. It's called Bergen County Voices During the American Revolution. And he puts together pension records and some accounts of individuals who were both Whigs and Tories, loyalists and patriots during the war. And it's a very, very good book to access and gives you another flavor, really what went on in that area in Bergen County. Also, there's another one by, Mr. James Gigantino II, The American Revolution in New Jersey. Again, an excellent book. It's a series of essays. So he's basically the editor on it, but it's a series of essays by historians about the goings on in New Jersey. And there's some excellent essays in there that gives you a very good flavor of what was going on in New Jersey, which also equated to New York. Because you have to realize also, folks, and I don't want to belabor everything, but New York and New Jersey shared ties, family ties, especially with the Dutch, because they settled these areas. Remember what I said at the beginning of the presentation? Most of these people owned land on both sides of the river. And both sides had family on both sides of the river. So there was this constant interaction. So, and especially with Bergen County, Orange County is right near the line. Right across the river is Westchester County, okay, Rockland County. So you've got this tight-knit group. The Dutch tended not to stray that far from certain areas that they originally settled. You know, they tended to stay in these areas. And still today, you'll find a lot of Dutch in those areas, Dutch families.
You know, Russ, this has been very good for me because I've been researching my father's side of the family for I belong to the DAR, and I wanted to do a genealogy. And it drove me crazy because they were constantly moving from New Jersey to New York, back again and up again. And I'm trying to figure out who's who at the zoo here, that they keep moving back. And now I understand why, because the land was back and forth.
You're absolutely right. And in conducting some research, remember my ancestor, I said Captain William, who his home was burned, but then he took retribution against his Tory neighbors. His father, John or Johannes Dutcher, in his will, he died in October of 1776. So after the war had started. Now, his son was an ardent patriot. I mean, with a bounty on his head, is a patriot from the Loyalists. And I mean, but in his will, reading his will, and his will was only written, was not written a few years prior. It was written right before he died. He still referred to himself by the grace of God, King George III. He was still hoping, the captain's father was still hoping for a resolution of this war. So again, going through these documents, it just shows me among families, you know, he had fought in the French and Indian War. His son was now an ardent patriot. But again, in his will to the day he died, he refers to himself as a loyal subject of the king. And this was the case with many, many members of the Dutch families. They were still hoping for resolution. But folks, as the war progressed and became more ferocious, then this wanton disregard just expanded and it steamrolled and it was out of hand. And again, like I said, I'm just glad I was able to present this to you because this is real history. It's not sugar-coated history. It's something we need to know about. And it does equate to what the political climate today, what's going on. Melissa, you had that perfect example. This happened prior. And on levels in those areas that we can just imagine. But I want to thank you all for, you know, tuning in for the questions. And I really enjoyed this.
I'm clapping for you over here. That's one thing I miss a lot of things about being in person, but the resounding applause at the end, I really miss. So I hope you can hear them virtually. Thank you so much, Russ, for your remarks. Thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you again to everyone involved in pulling this event together, especially Barbara Roysch. So thanks so much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. We hope to see you next month. Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you very much. Take care.